and then heading into a hypothetical scenario. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bill Talon, Vice President of Tactical Operations. Give me 1 second here. Bill, looks like your audio is up, and I will make you the presenter, and you should be good to go there.
Very good. We should be on the same screen.
Yes, we are.
Very good. Welcome, everybody. We are going to begin to talk about teams here, and we're going to walk into it with a little bit of prior discussion, and then go into a real-life scenario that we have some direct personal familiarity with, and then develop some possible alternatives and branches and development of that to illustrate some points about the advantages of working as a team as opposed to an individual. So let's see if we can just jump right into this. If I can. First, let's go back and talk about some basics that relate to individual preparedness. Several key things, we've spoken about these in prior webinars, and let me reiterate briefly. 4 things you need to have as an individual to, as a baseline, to be prepared to confront a violent threat. The first of them is knowledge in the form of situational awareness, the ability to see and know what is going on around you, to recognize danger signs, anticipate and recognize a threat. The second one is judgment, the ability to quickly assess your options and choose a viable option. Has to be done quickly, and it has to be done with very limited information. Thirdly, the tools, the technology, accessories, implements that will enable you to resist and prevail in a violent confrontation. A firearm is only one of many. And finally, skills, the ability to use your tools successfully. Skills, of course, are a direct output of training. But here we confront a problem, and that is that in the evolving threat environment that we all face today, no level of individual preparedness may be enough. Okay, aggressors tend to run in packs, whether they are criminals or politically motivated or terrorists or any of the various combinations and permutations of threats that we all may face. And the simple fact of the matter is that what we call the 360-degree spherical awareness of your surroundings that allows you to detect and anticipate and react to emerging threats, that's extremely difficult to maintain on an ongoing basis. One set of eyes, one brain, usually very fully invested in the activities of daily life. It's very, very hard to maintain that awareness on an ongoing basis. Threats in our environment, in our domestic peacetime environment, are embedded in what we call the sanctuary of normalcy. It creates a very great hazard, which is that sometimes a threat will not materialize until it is within arm's reach. We don't exclude our entire social milieu outside of our personal sphere of influence. Threats emerge very, very rapidly, and the transition to violence can be very, very sudden and very shocking. So unless we're 100% switched on, skilled, attentive, and courageous enough to be proactive before a threat materializes, then all the advantages of surprise and initiative and landing the first blow always belong to the aggressor. Mike Tyson said this very, very vividly. He said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. The courage part is something that bears thinking about, and that is, it's the moral courage to recognize an impending event, an imminent threat, and act on it. The flip side of that moral courage is the position of denial, that this hasn't happened to me before, this can't be happening here, it must be something else, I must be mistaken. And as our brain cycles through those various aspects of denial, we lose time, we lose position, and we find ourselves increasingly vulnerable when the threat does materialize. It takes great moral courage to take your family member by the arm and hustle them out of the mall before the shooting begins. Because 9 times out of 10, you may be anticipating a problem which does not materialize. You have to be prepared to face perhaps a little bit of embarrassment or inconvenience in your daily life if you want to be really, really ahead of the threats that may materialize in front of you. Keeping your head on a swivel. You may recognize the graphic there on the lower right from the classic scene in Jurassic Park where the human hunter is ambushed by the velociraptors. If all the above is not enough, when a violent confrontation begins, there's a sympathetic nervous system response that, among other things, narrows your field of vision, creates auditory exclusion, slows down your mental processes. The result is that your attention focuses on the first or worst apparent threat in front of you to the exclusion of other inputs. If you were challenged already in maintaining situational awareness and that state of relaxed awareness that Colonel Cooper spoke of, then under these circumstances, your ability constricts even further. Famous old gentleman, Alfred von Schlieffen, the man whose planning and preparations almost won the First World War in its first month, so he knew of what he spoke. He said, flank attack is the essence of the whole history of war. And this applies to individuals just as it does to armies. We tend to focus on what is in front of us, and we become very, therefore, fixated on those threats in front of us and vulnerable to what approaches unseen and unanticipated from the side or from the rear. The essence of tactics lies in appreciating angles and distance, speed, face, and force, all these factors that define from how many directions, in how many forms, and how quickly can danger approach. And the graphic just provides sort of a visual picture of this point. If you have ever had to move through your own house or through any other structure or through any complex rural environment that's full of angles and cover and dead spaces and potential but unknown threats, then I'm sure you will appreciate how vitally important a partner or a team can be. The disproportionate value of even one teammate in such a situation is what we mean when we say synergy of the team. Now, let me give you a narrative description of a recent event. Names changed to protect the innocent, but all the facts we'll relate in this initial narrative are essentially true. At 10:30 one spring evening, John and Susan, after attending a public meeting in town, they pick up their 9-year-old daughter from the babysitter and head north out of town toward their home in the country. On the outer edge of town, John overtakes a Dodge Durango driving 25 miles per hour in the traffic lane. It's not weaving, it's not driving erratically, it's just driving very, very slowly for some unknown reason. And so John pulls out to the left in order to pass. As he comes abreast of the Durango, it speeds up. And here's John's first choice. He can either drop back, because now the other driver apparently is not interested in being passed, or he can speed up to complete the passing maneuver. He chooses the latter. He accelerates rapidly, and he sees a curve ahead. And so he pulls back into the northbound lane as soon as he's got safe clearance to do so. At that point, the Durango's bright headlights come on, and it accelerates until it is almost touching his bumper. This is developing into a fairly classic example of road rage. Now, already traveling at the 55-mile-per-hour speed limit, John figures there's no good future in speeding up to get away from this individual, so he comes off the gas pedal, slowing slightly to encourage the Durango to pass him. But it only drops back slightly and then comes back up to crowd his bumper. So now there's some situational awareness and assessment going on. John has tight curves and grades ahead. Having this fellow riding his bumper is an unsafe condition, and there's an unknown level of threat here. So John sees a turnout ahead for a historical marker. He knows that there's no other place to safely get off the roadway for a few miles. So he pulls off to the right into the broad paved turnout, still hoping that the other driver will simply pass him and continue on. And here's where the situation goes from uncomfortable and bad to considerably worse. The driver of the Durango lays on his horn, veers rapidly around John, and then pulls into the turnout directly ahead of him and stops abruptly. The other car is less than 10 yards ahead of him. The driver's door flies open, the driver jumps out and moves toward the rear of his car, illuminated by John's headlights. It's unclear whether there's a right seat passenger or any other individuals in the car in front. The other driver, who now is identifiable as a long-haired young white male in a leather jacket, rounds the back end of his SUV and approaches John's car. He's shouting and waving his arms. His hands appear empty. So now we have choices. John's illegally armed. He has a 9mm semi-automatic holstered on his right hip, which places it under his jacket, behind the buckle of his seatbelt, and wedged between his kidney and the back seat, or the bucket seat of his car. His wife, Susan, is also armed. She carries a .38 revolver in her purse on the floor in front of her. His daughter is in the back seat. The other driver is approaching his door. He's only 4 or 5 yards away. He's aggressive and angry, but so far apparently unarmed. So the big question in John's mind now is, what do I do? Shooting is not a good option. He has only a very thin justification for drawing his weapon and shooting. A reasonable fear of death or serious bodily harm might be a hard sell to a jury. Besides, he couldn't, if he wanted to, because he cannot get to his firearm before the other driver is at his window. And he doesn't know if there are any other people in the Durango. And he knows that any sort of fight at this point will put his wife and daughter immediately at risk. So all of this, of course, transpiring in a period of just a few seconds. John does perceive that he has enough room to drive around the Durango and the guardrail on the right. So never having taken the car out of drive, he accelerates rapidly through the gap back onto the highway and proceeds. As he looks back in his rearview mirror, he sees that the Durango's headlights turn and come back up onto the highway, so the car is on the highway behind him. His wife dials 911, explains the situation to the dispatcher. But a couple of miles later, when John emerges from the canyon, he sees no headlights behind him, so he has no idea whether the Durango is still following or not. The 911 dispatcher advises that the nearest deputy, this being a rural area, is 20 minutes away, and asks if his assistance is needed, and Susan declines. A few miles ahead, this being familiar territory, John sees a roadside lodge and RV park. Suspecting that the car may still be behind him, he pulls in, parks between two empty cabins, and turns off his light, and sure enough, a few minutes later, the Durango drives past on the highway. John waits 10 minutes more to ensure separation, and then he pulls back out on the highway and proceeds in the same direction towards his home, which is still 10 miles away. There's no other traffic on the highway. And 200 yards before his turn off towards his house, there's a gas station and a general store closed at this hour. And as he passes it, slowing down to make his turn, there's the Durango. Its lights come on, and it pulls out behind him. So, choices again. He's not going to stop again. He won't lead the Durango to his home. 2 weapons are now immediately accessible in his car. Susan redials 911, and the dispatcher advises that a deputy is approaching from the south a few minutes away. So John turns off the highway. The Durango follows. He takes the first left on a gravel road. The Durango follows him through that turn. He makes 2 more left turns, which put him back on the highway, southbound. The Durango has followed him around this box. He's clearly established that the driver's intention is to follow him. And he sees, as he turns onto the highway, he sees the deputy's car actually stopped on the opposite shoulder. And so as the Durango follows John back onto the highway, the deputy pulls out, conducts a vehicle stop, pulls the Durango over, and John and his family proceed by a circuitous, discreet route back to their home nearby. Now, let's do a really quick after-action review of the situation. This was a positive outcome. He drove away from the developing trouble at the first stop. The aggressor did not employ a firearm or use his vehicle as a weapon. Nobody was shot or hurt. Police intervention was timely and successful, about as good an outcome as we could hope for in a situation like that. And sometimes a positive outcome is as much the result of chance and luck as it is good planning, preparation, and response. This is an important training point. The fact that a situation resolves in your favor cannot always be credited to your good decision making or your skills or your actions. Sometimes there are simply elements of chance that stack up in your favor. The driver in this case turned out to be a habitual drug user with an out-of-state criminal record. He had a history with local law enforcement. He had a prior felony conviction and was smart enough not to carry firearms because of that. But he was known to carry knives routinely. Of course, none of that was known to John and Susan at the time of the incident. So now what we'll do is we'll take that real-life situation and we'll construct a couple of hypothetical branches off of this. And this will lead us back around to our discussion of the value of the team. This technique is itself a fundamental and valuable training tool, wargaming. We're wargaming a situation firmly grounded in reality so that we can do these 3 things. We're exploring different courses of action that might have been taken. We're exploring varying conditions, things that might have developed a little bit differently than they did historically. And we're looking at possible outcomes of those changes in conditions and changes in course of action. In doing this, we're adding to the fund of experience that drives our effective decision making. The purpose of that, as is well developed in the theory of recognition prime decision making, is that by experience, which includes mental rehearsal, reading, wargaming, studying the actions and experiences of others, also includes our experiences in training environments. We build up a fund of experience which will place us in a position, we hope, in a fast-breaking situation where we can say to ourselves, I've seen this before. Not just this, but I've seen something very similar to this. I have a pretty good idea of what won't work, and I have an idea of what may work. And that sort of recognition based on experience then allows us to quickly come to decisions which will have a good chance of success. And then, of course, this kind of analysis then suggests improvements, next steps in training and planning and preparation for possible events we may face in the future. Now, all these branches, we're going to look at several of them rather quickly here. They're not all necessarily positive. They don't all end well, but they reflect actual responses of other people in similar circumstances, and likely decisions and branches in terms of the development of the situation. We'll see courses of action that might or might not succeed in reality. Okay, branch 2. John's a little bit more proactive. He unholsters his weapon at the first off-normal indicator, okay, which would be as he's passing the Durango in the first place, and the lights come on and he speeds up. To do so, he has to unbuckle his seatbelt, take a hand off the steering wheel, split his attention in the midst of his maneuvering in an unknown threat situation on a nighttime highway. He shoves the pistol between his left thigh and the seat so he has quick access to it. But the question we have to ask is, what is more likely at this point, a gunfight or a crash resulting from a loss of control of the vehicle? But let's assume that he's lucky again, and John manages to retain control of his vehicle. When he stops abruptly in the turnout, however, his pistol, unrestrained, slips from under his thigh to land on the floorboard under his feet. The suspect's vehicle swerves and stops directly in front of him, and this time, there's no room to drive around it, to get away. His only alternative for escape is to reverse back onto the highway, but as always happens in these situations, his situational awareness is already compromised. He's focused on the developing situation in front of him. He doesn't know if there's other traffic approaching from behind, and so therefore he hesitates to throw the car into reverse and back out into potential oncoming traffic, and time is running out. As he gropes for the weapon, the suspect reaches his car, shatters the driver window with the pommel of a large knife, while his wife is groping in her purse on the floorboard and his daughter is screaming in the back seat. And so we will end branch 2, which we can see is probably not going to end well. Now let's rewind again. Branch 3. As a result of his wargaming of similar situations, his analysis of these potential threats out on the road, John's developed the habit of pulling his coat or cover garment out from under his shoulder belt and checking his access to his holster whenever he's seated in the car. When he decides to stop, he's anticipating the next phase in this developing situation, and he understands that this driver may seek to stop and provoke a confrontation. So he brakes hard as he swerves into the turnout, causing the Durango to overshoot and come to a stop 25 yards. He angles his car to the outside, which places more of the structure of the car between the threat and his wife and daughter, even though this compromises his own ability to use the car for cover. Kevin quickly orders his daughter onto the floor in the back seat. His wife has dropped her phone and is reaching for her revolver. The driver of the Durango dismounts as he did before, but this time he has a pistol in his hand. John loses no time in dismounting himself, slamming the door behind him, drawing his weapon as he sprints away from the car, giving up the cover that it could provide him because he does not want his family in the line of fire. The threat is eliminated by John's headlights, while John, off to the left side, is not illuminated. John activates the weapon light, which he has installed on his pistol, directing its dazzling strobe at the suspect. His uncertain position, the dazzling effect of that high-intensity strobe, and his verbal command to the suspect to stop right there is effective, and the suspect stops in his tracks. Okay? Further commands lead to the suspect dropping the weapon. The suspect moved away from the weapon, proned out on the ground, awaiting the police, who, in this situation, we can presume will respond within minutes once telephone contact is reestablished. So we have a somewhat happier ending to this branch. However, branch 3 presented still a fairly tame problem. One aggressor, easily dominated by an individual who was well-equipped, trained, and mentally prepared. So let's look at what could go wrong even with that scenario. This time, in branch 4, there is a second individual in the other vehicle. A second armed suspect appears, exits the vehicle, finds himself lit up by John's headlights, runs around the front of the Durango to escape that illumination. So as the first suspect stops when challenged, the second suspect continues to run out to John's left and opens fire. The first suspect is not yet disarmed. The second suspect is not illuminated. And at this point, will stop this branch of the scenario because the outcome will be a question of shooting skill, a gunfight at medium range, in the open, and outnumbered. Now, all of our baseline assumptions up to this point include the fundamental assumption that John's wife has a .38 Special revolver in her purse with no weapon light, a very modest level of square range training, and no tactical preparation. Our contribution to the situation does, if in fact it does lead to gunfire, will be undoubtedly brave in defense of her family, but probably minimally effective. So let's rewind and reset this assumption. Branch 5. Susan has concurred with all of John's prior weapons-related purchases and training on one firm condition. She says, I want all the same stuff. I want the same gear, and I want to train to the same level that you do. So now she's trained with John to a solid level of competence with her own Smith & Wesson 9mm semi-automatic. Beyond combat handgun fundamentals, they've participated in reality-based training, and they have talked and walked through a broad set of scenarios based on their own assessment of possible threats, including one similar to this. And on that foundation, with no need for any communication, on her own initiative, Susan exits the car at the same time that John does, hops over the guardrail, and assumes a braced kneeling position as far back as she safely can in order to avoid spalling through and off of the cover. She has no immediate need to activate her weapon light and reveal her position because everything in front of her is illuminated either by headlights or by John's light. When the second armed suspect exits the right side of the car, Susan immediately sees it and identifies the weapon. She can hear and see the exchange between Kevin and the first suspect. By ignoring that exchange and coming out with a weapon in his hand, the second suspect has satisfied the fundamental conditions for the use of deadly force. Susan would be arguably justified in shooting at this point if she chose, but she has another option, and that option is to activate her own weapon light and verbalizing to the second suspect. It's a viable and prudent option, and that is what we shall assume she does. And now, Susan and her husband are in firm control of the situation. Depending on the suspect's compliance or lack of it, they'll resolve the immediate situation on favorable terms. If either suspect does not comply with instructions, and this turns into a fight, both John and Susan are in positions of advantage and are very likely to resolve it quickly and in their favor. The synergy of the team that we spoke about earlier is just this simple and powerful. A situation that John alone, even at presumed high levels of training and preparedness and responsiveness, could not have resolved successfully, becomes easily managed when his wife is functioning at the same level that he is. And finally, there's one last critical piece that we'll address here briefly, and that is that under the conditions of these scenarios, police response within minutes is likely. Now, we know that in many, many cases in modern America that will not be the case, but under these conditions, it's a safe assumption. So the last critical piece of this, of all these branching scenarios, is to ensure a safe handoff to law enforcement when they arrive. Now, assuming that there's been no shooting, but we have two suspects who were armed and who have now become disarmed and compliant, the danger here is that police officers arriving, even as a direct result of John and Susan's phone contact, will roll up on a situation where they see armed individuals, weapons on the ground, other individuals on the ground, their condition unknown, and that is an invitation for misidentification and disaster unless we manage it correctly. We address these issues in the intent to defend protocol, which you will find under the group heading in the Defense Academy. But the key elements which apply here are these. The suspects must be disarmed. What that means here is not approaching as a law enforcement team would with a contact officer and a cover officer in handcuffs. In this case, it simply means direct the suspects to ground or drop their weapons, move away from those weapons, and go prone, ankles crossed, hands in view, where they cannot move swiftly, in a location where one person, John or Susan, can keep an eye and, if necessary, a gun on both of them. And secondarily, John and Susan should not have their weapons in their hand when police first roll up on the scene. If they have taken the situation well under control, the suspects are disarmed, away from their weapons, on the ground. They will be momentarily safe in having their weapons holstered and immediately at hand, and it will probably eliminate that situation of them being misidentified by police upon arrival. So, this concludes our discussion of scenarios and branches. Turn over control to my partner. Some training implications of these scenarios. And
all right. Can you hear me all right, Bill, and see my screen?
yes, I can.
Okay, thank you much. As Bill mentioned, there are numerous components that go into proper performance for anyone undertaking an endeavor like this. And I'm just going to go over the tops of these real quickly, give you a flyby overview of them, and we will provide the links in here that will allow you in your leisure to come back over these PowerPoints and search the Defense Academy with your free admission to come in here and take a deeper look at what we're talking about. So looking at these components, we see that Susan and John in the above scenario had trained together. Susan had in fact demanded that she receive not just the equipment but the same type of training so she could feel comfortable with her actions as well. And you'll notice at this point, since we have John and Susan working together, they're what we would consider a micro team. And that micro team for us consists of anywhere from 2 to 4 or more people, just below the squad level, more in pushing toward a fire team level, if we're using military lingo. And to keep in mind, probably the most important thing you can keep in mind for yourself when we're talking about micro teams is that no matter what kind of team or unit tactics we're talking about, the basis for the real power in your team tactics and your unit tactics is very much dependent upon the individual's tactics themselves, their individual training. This goes back to the old concept that the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. You'll also notice in the above scenario that their training was based on their own realistic threat assessment. And that means they kind of go through their lives, the way they live their lives, the places they visit. They look at their assets and come up with their own scenario for their own particular location of what could potentially go very wrong for them. There's obviously a lot that goes into that. Primary component of that is avoiding that threat whenever possible instead of meeting it, as they did try to do in the scenarios. In the first scenario that the hypothetical was built off of, you'll notice that avoidance. So once they have that realistic threat assessment, they have that idea of what it is they can potentially run into, then of course their training must reflect that. And it's one way of helping you decide, going through that threat assessment, what you need to be looking at so you don't waste sword motion and you can get the most out of your training time possible. And so what comes into this then are the flat range drills, just range drills you can do, any range, outdoor range, indoor range, that help you to develop your skills with what we call stress-resistant techniques. These stress-resistant techniques use what we call fine or complex motor skills to accomplish the mission of weapons handling. And what that does is, even in that heightened state of excitement, where your fine-tuned motor skills are going out the door, your complex motor skills will still work. We talk about these skills extensively, the stress-resistant skills you'll need to dominate a lethal force encounter in both the handgun and the shotgun and the rifle manuals. And then, of course, it was mentioned in there the reality-based training, or the RBT, of realistic and relevant scenarios, which lends itself, if you'll go back to some of our previous discussions, to what we call stress inoculation, which is learning to function well in a high-stress environment because you're becoming used to it. Now, that's not stress-proofing. You'll not be shielded against stress, but you'll definitely learn how to operate and function quite well within it with the right reality-based training. And then, as we've mentioned previously, the killing enabling is a big part of that, because most people aren't capable of pressing that trigger when they most need to, should that need arise. If we look into the scenario on branch 5, you'll notice that Susan and John talked and walked through a broad set of applicable scenarios. And what this really means is, at some point they had to sit down and they had to develop for themselves plans, procedures, and immediate action drills drawn from the site survey, the threat assessment, and the asset evaluations that they had made to develop those plans, procedures, and immediate action drills. We can get pretty deep into this. As Bill mentioned, we can get into wargaming, which includes the tactical decision games. We have a team example in here you can link to with a fictitious company that has to deal with it. Puts it all kind of in context for you. Auto parts distributor out of Detroit. And then we go into interactive wargaming, which could include things like tabletops and even computer-aided gaming to help you kind of limber the mind up and gain more experiences and wrap your mind around what could go on, as well as terrain walks and tactical exercises without troops, which you could pretty much include things like chalk walks, tape walks of houses and situations where you might have to clear certain areas. All that without troops and without ammunition, the expense of all that, just to wrap your mind around it. When we look back at the scenario, you'll see one of the first things that Susan did was, on her very own initiative, she jumped out of the vehicle and found a position that she could dominate in. And because it's her own initiative, and because she had trained in all these, taking the opportunity to train through the war games, through her reality-based training, to the flat range training, moving like that and making that decision really does suggest that you have a great deal of confidence in being able to handle what's in front of you. And what you see that she did and what John did were very complex movements learned over a period of time. And one of the things you saw there was the maneuvering. Susan jumped over that guardrail and moved to a flanking position where she could either block or hastily ambush should something else develop. And in that maneuver on her own, what you can see is a proper use of cover and concealment and small team tactics and tasks that were a part of that movement that she'd obviously had to have practiced at some degree, to allow her to do that on her own initiative. You can imagine if she's using that cover and concealment correctly, that means she has backed away from that guardrail, as Bill described, to avoid what we call spalling, those little chunks of lead, copper, and whatever that impacts. And there is a proper use of cover. You need to understand that because it will aid you in extending your survivability. And then the proper use of the tactical weapons light. And so kind of keeping most of these in mind, most people don't think about these things, is first of all, she has one, because she and John realized that most gunfights, the Department of Justice tells us, take place in low light or no light conditions at very close proximity, are over with rather quickly, and are obviously very violent in nature. And then she knows how and when to use it, and she also retains the initiative due to the proper tactics being used. And all this, again, requires training. You can obviously set the foundation for all of this by reading, getting that intellectual knowledge, which is all available to you in that Defense Academy, that free membership you'll get in there. But with that foundational knowledge, that understanding you can build on, then you actually have to go outside. You actually have to go and actually train by yourself with other people to know how to interact with them. And the byproducts then are the ability to have the presence of mind, to have that peace of mind, to have that confidence, and then to go out, take your initiative, and make the right decisions because you've trained with someone or another group enough that you all pretty much know what you ought to be doing. And even when things don't line up the way you would like for them to do, which they usually don't, you can improvise on the fly and still make great decisions. But again, that's not just that fundamental learning about it. It's actually getting out there and doing it so you recognize the strengths and the weaknesses of your teammates and you can fill and flow appropriately. This kind of wraps up the presentation. What I'm going to do is I want to hand it over to Mike and he'll conduct the closing, and we'll take your questions at this time as well. Mike, can you hear me?
I can. Thank you, Ron.
Okay.